So to kick things off, what is a cube? A cube uses something called an OLAP query, OLAP, which is an online advanced processing, I believe was it was. But it basically means that whatever information you're looking at in Excel is dynamic. It's not like a regular pivot table where you have one tab that has all the data in a table and then another tab with the pivot. In a cube file, all you have is the pivot. So you can't create new rows and do calculated columns and things like that for our dynamic tools because it contains proprietary information. So it's housed in our database. So if you want to rename fields and things like that, it's more difficult because it has to be done at the database source in the back end. But our tools are designed based on Marika and Dom and my knowledge of the industry over the years with Yannick's programming expertise as well. So if you get to a point where you'd like something to say something differently, that is an easy conversation. But it's important to note that if you're looking for something provincially specific, the best place to find it is still usually in the web tool. And that goes for banner chain analysis as well. If you're looking for a banner chain analysis in the web tool, there is a section of your web tool called sales by banner chain. If that's not showing across the top of your black banner in your web tool, just send me a screenshot so I can double check it's linked to your login ID. Sales by banner chain and all of our advanced and analytical modules, like the distribution reports, the sales by banner chain, pricing, all that fun stuff. All of them should be linked to your profile for the big four markets, which are PQ, Ontario, BC, and Alberta. Whenever you want to start looking at regionality things like all four Western provinces together, or PQ and all four Atlantic provinces together, or that kind of thing, as soon as you start wanting to overlay the data of a certain province with another province, that's when we turn to something like a cube. Now, Christian, has everybody on the call here today actually been has access to the base raw copies of these that we built, or are they kept in some form in your company in a share folder somewhere?
I think we shared it for a while back. We could reshare again,
Sure.
especially for the new users, for sure.
That would be great. Thank
Okay. So the most important part to remember about a cube file is that it's linked to our database. So any market that receives weekly information updates at a different rate than a cube file. A provincial cube file updates once a month after all the channel data is fulsomely published for that market. And the national cube file only updates once a month after all channels in all markets are fulsomely published for all channels, all everythings. Okay, so Christian, is there my best advice for fulsome national reporting through the cube is the 21st of the month for the month in arrears. It's usually between 1 to 1.5 weeks into the next month where we'll get Quebec and Ontario fulsomely published, like wholesale gets finished, that kind of stuff. And then it's usually another week or so for the rest of the Atlantics to come in. And then the last one to publish is almost inevitably either Nova Scotia PEI or British Columbia. And those are usually the last ones because of how much later some of their channel data and private data comes in. So up until the national cube is published, you're always looking at the most recently fulsomely completed period. If you wanted to see any one of those provinces that you know is done publishing specifically, you can use the web tool, or you can use that province's national or that province's provincial cube. Okay. It's at this time that I would like to give everybody on the call the password for the cubes. And I've talked to Christian about this, and just having been somebody who worked with these files in the past, I'm going to do a quick disclaimer. This is a different password than the one that you used to sign into the web tool. And this password is extremely confidential. Okay, so don't share it with anybody that Christian hasn't When you have this file, it's linked directly to your EasyFocus agent tag database on our end. So it provides you with all of the data that we have for your agent tag. If there's any nomenclature or labeling issues that you see in the cube, like something isn't in the right brand family, you should know that that's a completely ongoing process for us. Every single month there's new SKUs that come out, or the liquor board overwrites something. We hired somebody back in November, and that's become his full-time job, and it's getting a lot closer to where we need to get to. I myself this morning just found, I think it was 183 cases of some of your 40 Creek brands that were under a different corporate group. Yeah. So the important thing to note is that when you want to operate these cube files, it's a lot like operating any other pivot table. You click and you drag and you manipulate the columns and the rows, and you can overlay things like distribution. You can overlay things like distribution at a provincial level. In the national cube, you're still only going down to the SKU level. So it's important to note, if you want to look at national perspective distribution, the national export button from the distribution report in the web tool is probably the best place to do that for any retail or private channels. And if you're looking at national on-premise distribution in terms of what the sales teams are entering in for the private OP channels and what the liquor boards are giving us for the public on-premise channels, then the file that I included in your email this morning with all of the OP distribution is a really great table to use, because that's capturing all of your CRM inputs as well as what the liquor boards are giving us. I want everybody to imagine that you're at a pottery class. Now, I'm sure we have some big burly Quebecois men on the call as well who have never been to a pottery class in their entire life. But just for the sake of argument, imagine that you're in a pottery class. When you're in a pottery class and you've never been there before, what does the instructor do? They put a giant clump of clay on their table, and then they get it to where they want. They break off a piece and they give it to everybody around the room, and that's how you go about it. When it comes to the data sourcing of this cube, I want you to run with that analogy. If you ever get to a point where you've got the tables completely wacky wonky and it's never the way it was, you can always delete the file and you can go back to the source one and start again. So this very last tab, the new one, is the one that you can save as your separate file. You're on your desktop. So you just right click on the tab, move the tab to a new file, save it on your desktop, my template, okay? The reason I say this is because the way that these files are built to work, for each tab that you have in the workbook, it has its own data connection to the server. So if you right click on a pivot in any tab and hit refresh, the file tries to refresh one password for each tab that you have open. So if you're creating workbooks of different types of queries, and then you get one the way you want, and you just want it to refresh next month, my recommendation is to either save it as a separate file, or to save, if you have category queries or pricing queries, that kind of thing, group them together as tabs and save those as separate files. Because you don't want to have 15, 20 tabs open, because then anytime you hit refresh, it's going to ask you for the password 15 or 20 times. So anytime you want to refresh just one pivot in the file, instead of actually having to refresh the whole document, don't even need to hit refresh. You would just need to select on any field, and then it asks you for your password before it allows you to actually input or manipulate the table at all. And after it lets you through, that data has been refreshed. If you're ever curious to make sure that you're looking at the most recently completed period, one of the very first options in the pivot table fields, and if you don't see this on the right-hand side of your screen when you open it, remember that across the top here in your Excel file under pivot table, the design is where you can actually hit this button to turn on and off the visibility of the fields. The last completed period will always tell you what the most recently fulsomely completed national period is, and then you can drill that down to provinces as well. So I did create a few examples, and just to make sure, is anybody on the call that has a different set of tabs along the bottom, or does everybody say category, SKU, national corporate group, by agency, share, channel? Does everybody have the same ones? If anybody doesn't, just raise your hands or let me know. These are just some defaults that I put together for everybody on the call. But the point is that you can manipulate the information to show you anything you wanted to see. So what I'd like to do right now, instead of taking you through the countless thousands of configurations you could do, is really ask for a volunteer to give me an example of a query that we'd like to put together from scratch, and what type of information they've either struggled to put together from the web tool before, or more importantly, one of those types of things where you have to pull 5 things from 3 provinces and put it together yourself in Excel. Can anybody give me, one of our many year veterans, maybe an example of something like that they tried to do before?
Start if possible. Like, is there a way to see a like national provincial breakdown of by province of say total 40 Creek, as opposed to SKU by province?
Sure. That's a great question. Short answer is very yes. So all I did here was in my new tab, I logged in, I signed in. I put provinces in the rows, and then I'm going to go up to my pivot table fields, and I'm going to find where it says agents. And I'll add that to the filters, not the rows, because if I add it to the rows, it actually puts the information in the table. I'd like to see everything that has the 40 Creek Distillery National Agent Tag. So that's what we use as the agent tag nationally for all of the 40 Creek Campari brands. So every brand SKU has a provincial supplier and agent tag, and a national supplier and agent tag. And that's less designed for something like Campari 40 Creek, and much more designed for other brands and suppliers and agents, sometimes who have 3, 4, and 5 different agencies across the country. So it's important to note that here you're always looking at the national supplier and agent tags, okay? So I've filtered on 40 Creek, and now I need to pick what perspective my measures need to be. So at the top, because I'm thinking 40 Creek, it's probably good to think 9-liter cases, because that's a mixture of spirits, wine, all volume and things like that. Do I want a specific period? Do I want to look at previous calendar years? Or do I want to look at what we call relative time frames? For the sake of simplicity for this, let's say it's relative time frames. Now I need to think to myself, do I want to look at channels differently, or do I want to look at all channels added together? I'd like the total. And I'm going to look at 9-liter rolling year last year, rolling year this year, and the variance. So in 5 clicks, there's my 40 Creek national number. And I can actually just start breaking it down by segments very easily by taking segments out of the filters and dropping them here after the rows. And what that does is now all of a sudden I'm looking at each province, and I right click to add a subtotal, and I can look at the breakdown of my spirits and wine business in each province differently. George, have you got a question there, bud?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming we can drill down to brand level as well. So if we want just 40 Creek brand.
The world is your oyster, my man. You can drill down to whatever you like. On the right-hand side here in the pivot table fields, after you've configured the most important things, which are what you want your base row to be built on, so in this case, provincial, what do I want my drill levels to be after that? All you need to do is scroll down to the bottom of your list of fields and find where it says products. This is an important note, folks. There's two different options here under products. There's one that we have built ourselves here internally at EasyFocus to help our users use this type of tool, which basically provides a drill down from corporate group, supplier, brand, sub-branded product, which you can just add quickly. But if you don't want all of that information, because remember, the more information you add to the table, the longer the load takes. Okay, the more internet bandwidth it takes, the longer the OLAP query takes. If you add something super complex to the pivot table and it needs to take 5 minutes to load, well, then you need to sit there and wait for that Excel file to load because you've just told it to pull, 650,000 lines of code from the database. So the easiest thing I always say is, if I'm really just looking for a drill down of, segments and then my suppliers, or segments and then brands, that's the second option here on the more fields, the product one, where you can actually say, all I'm really interested in at this point is the brand family, or the price, or the product SKU code, because if I'm going to cut and paste all this stuff out of the pivot into a different file to start working with my pricing analysis, for example, I really only need the SKU codes to do VLOOKUPs or any other kind of formulaic work in Excel. So if I add brands, I just click and I hold, I drag it down, I put it after the segment, and now all of a sudden my pivot table is a million fields and I feel like, ah. So one of the little tricks that I really love doing here at this time, folks, is if your pivot table is now extending out to the bottom of the screen, I want you to, it's a term called a fulcrum. Pick your fulcrum, which is this very first cell. Very first cell in the pivot table, and then you go view, freeze the panes, and now when you scroll down, you still have the column headers of your tool there. If you are to right click on any of the segments or in any column, really, you can collapse things, collapse the entire field so that you can open, one specific area that you're interested in opening versus all of them, kind of thing.
So if we were to put segment and brand as a filter, would we be able to have just like a, say, 40 Creek view type of thing?
Sorry, could you maybe rephrase the question, George? I'm not understanding.
Just how you moved segment up into filter. If we moved brand up there, for example, would we be able to also just filter, see the national view by, say, 40 Creek? Or Wild Turkey, yeah. Yeah, so I guess there it is, yeah.
Right click on any value row, sort it, large. Conditional formatting in pivot tables makes it really easy to visualize things, particularly if you build yourself a gap report.
And would we be able to compare this to a competitor?
Yeah, so one of the defaults that I built for everybody here is agency share versus industry. That tab at the bottom here. One of the options that's in your pivot table fields is this one here called 40 Creek Market. So what that means is I'd like the option to either filter one, filter the other, or see them both next to each other. And rather than adding that type of filter to a filter or a row or a value, I add it to the columns. So at the top here, for this example here, all I would say is, I want to add country to my table here. And then I'm going to say, show me everything that comes from Canada only. Or show me my import stuff, how it's doing, my import stuff doing versus the market. And this is all three of them put together. A very handy tool for calculating spirits market share, which I'm sure is something that maybe one or two folks on this call have had to do for the C-suite at one point, I hope. My hope is that this type of tool will really cut down on the time required to do that kind of thing, because If my time in the spirits world ever taught me anything, share of market, share of value, share of price segment, those are extremely important strategic markers to how your brands go to market. If you ever come across a situation where a pivot table is like this and not like this, that is not too much to fret about. It just has to do with the settings of that particular pivot. So one thing that you can do here is right click on the pivot, go to the pivot table options, go over to where it says display, and then just tick on the, make sure that I mean, you don't have to use classic view, but in my experience, classic view has always been a little bit easier on the, I want to start talking about exportation, and I want to talk about data security as far as exportation goes really quickly. So let's say that I'm going to use my, this one here, which is just, you know, this is all the channels. So this is all everything. This is retail, which is off premise, on premise, and then the other channel. So what is the other channel? Well, other channel is different things in every market. Other channel in Ontario is grocery. Other channel in BC is LRS. Other channel in Quebec can be a mixture of depot and that kind of thing. So again, it's important to remember perspective on whatever the other channel is labeled at in the web tool is what it represents. Okay, so let's talk about cut and paste and exportation, because one of the things that we love this for is for putting presentations together and sharing it with customers. Well, you can't share this file with a customer if they can't move the pivot around, and you can't give them the password because it's a sensitive internal piece of information. So what do? Well, there's two things that you can do. If you wanted to just export data and fiddle around with it in another way, then you just need to cut and paste another page. Now, if I hit Control V and just paste, what I've done is I've pasted the pivot table. It brought the data connection with me. So how do I paste it just as numbers? You can right click and you can paste as a value with the source formatting. And now you've got just numbers. So if I wanted to make a graph, I could then just insert a pie chart or a bar graph or a line graph, and I would just select the data fields that I wanted. Another option for easy exportation, which I did quite a bit when suppliers would want to know, is I would configure the table the way I wanted to see it. So in this case, let's use one that we put together already, which was the example one we did for all 40 Creek wild turkey by province. If I want to do, I know that you guys have different supplier structures, but let's say that the supplier for wild turkey was asking for this one. All I would do is I would right click on this tab that I made in my pottery class main piece of clay, right click on this tab, move the tab that I'm working with to a new document. So now I just have this one, and then all I do is I click on the pivot and I go up to the tab that says data, and then right below that there's a button that says queries and connections. And over here on the right hand side is where you'll see our connection. You just right click and you delete it. And now you've got static data. This is a pivot table that's no longer connected to EasyFocus. It's a report that you pulled and configured yourself, and you can send this as a static Excel file to each other, to a customer, and you don't have to worry about having had shared your cube. So if you ever send a cube file and somebody writes you back saying, hey, can I have the password? You didn't break that connection before you sent it. Very important step if you wanted to share the data. Otherwise, like I said, you guys can keep these files in a shared place and create a tab for each person that works with that. You can break the tabs off, put it on your desktop, manipulate the information, that kind of thing. Distribution gap reports at provincial levels are great tools to use as well. That's when you want to do stuff like, if I wanted to look at my category distribution opportunities versus top ranked category stores by channel, that kind of thing. banner chain analysis for BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec tool. So for Ontario, for example, you would say you would have to nominate your channel, you would have to nominate your store type, and you'd have to nominate what kind of distribution you want. So the queries in the cubes become more complex. That's why we built the web tool. We built the web tool to make the user experience easiest for sales organizations and folks who don't have an analytical background to be able to manipulate things and pull reports for pitches. So as I said to a few folks at Campari when we did our orientations, if you have trouble putting queries together or you're not sure how to configure the cube properly, rather than writing me an email that says, hey, I'm trying to do this, and when I touch this, it does that, and if I look at it this way, it does this, and you've just written 2 paragraphs, if you send me the file that you're working on and say, what am I doing wrong? I would send you back a copy of that file that you sent me with a new tab configured the way you want, and then you can take a look at the fields. And, I gave everybody a few of those just to get you up and running kind of thing. And then again, there's lots of really good content in the PowerPoint document that I sent over as far as what you can select, how to find field list particulars, what they mean, and all that fun. Absolutely true. The cubes become easier the more and more you use them. And if it's just like an easy focus in the web, if you find a report the way you like, you save your preferences. The cubes are exactly the same way. If you build something the way you like it, leave it that way, save it that way, because next month when the data refreshes, the report that you've built is just going to refresh with that month's new data in it. Okay. So as Christian said, it was a lot for one day. We really just wanted to let everybody know that these tools are available to the team. And if you have any questions on how to put a specific query together, please consider me a resource for you. Okay.